Welcome to another Howls and Growls breakdown, and today we're talking about Anthony Edwards and his playmaking, because that's what's going to take him to the next level as a true superstar in this league. And we know that that is what the playoffs do. They highlight strengths and they highlight weaknesses and they test them on the biggest stage. We saw all of the wondrous things that Edwards can do as a scorer and as an on-ball pitbull defender, but we also saw how he lacks the ability to truly control the floor in the way the league's best ball handling stars do. Now the thing is that Edwards did go up a level as a playmaker in these playoffs when it came to punishing help defenders and aggressive defenses when getting downhill. He certainly leveled up as the season progressed. So when he drives at the rim here, he's got Jokic stepping over to help on him already, but he's also got MPJ sagging in as a helper, and that's when he can find that corner shooter. Those are the types of passes that Edwards is beginning to master, and they're important because he's facing those defenders sitting in those gaps every single night now. Look at how the Mavericks sat in this shell at the boxes and the elbows to deter his driving game. That's going to open up those passes when he gets into the middle of the paint, and he needs to trust his teammates to make shots when the defense forces them to make shots. And there were some really advanced reads that he did make in this playoff run especially. So when Booker comes up to double here, Edwards doesn't make the easiest read to McDaniels, who is a streaky shooter. He gets downhill, engages Gobert's defender here, and then forces Durant to help on Gobert. And that's the moment that Edwards can punish Durant by finding his man, Mike Conley, who's a dead-eye corner gunner. Edwards is at his best when he is puncturing through the first line of defense and then wrecking teams with his blend of power and finesse at the rim. So opposing teams, particularly in the playoffs where everything is magnified, are going to pack that paint. So it's super important that he can collapse those defensive shells and then make the reads to the shooters, and he did that in this playoff run. Edwards drove the ball a whopping 247 times in the postseason, and among those super high usage drivers with over 200 drives, only Luka Doncic has a higher assist percentage on drives than Edwards, who assisted on 11.3% of his drives. Downhill destruction is an essential part of Ant's game. So seeing him use and leverage that gravity that he creates in those situations to generate open looks for his teammates is really encouraging and should now be a weapon in his offensive arsenal going forward. Another way he really thrived this season, and in the playoffs particularly, is using the roll man's vertical gravity going toward the rim to find those shooters from a standstill position. So when the defense is up in coverage here and Gobert rolls in behind them, Gordon has to come off Naz Reid as the low man to help on Gobert's roll, and that's when Edwards can sling that pass over to Reid in the corner, and that's a really valuable pass to have in the bag with a rolling threat like Gobert on the roster. Again, he comes off this pick and Gobert's man comes up at him, which means Gobert can pivot into that space and Kevin Durant has to step into the paint here to provide protection, and that opens the door for that sling pass to the corner where Conley gets a layup for him. So in those two areas, not only has Edwards improved from what was a pretty low baseline when he came into the league, but they've actually become strings in his bow and a legitimate weapon within Minnesota's stagnant offense. If he's able to hit the gas and make plays for others off his burst to the rim or whip passes around the perimeter, Edwards is just going to be a viable playmaker. But he just got a front row seat to Luka Doncic using his playmaking PhD to demolish the Timberwolves, and the way Doncic manipulates defenses and finds their weak spots at slower, more methodical speeds is the kind of thing Edwards needs to learn if he wants to become a heliocentric offensive megastar. What Edwards requires is a gear change that ends in a killer pass. That is his leap. So when the Wolves run this Spain action, can he slow it down, engage Jokic, force Jackson to make decisions on defense, and then hit the lob to Gobert over the top when he continues his roll to the rim, or whip that pass to Alexander Walker who is drifting out of the action to the 3-point line? When you run that back at full speed, you see how quickly he rushes into it instead of manipulating the defense and assessing those options, and it ends in a pretty unnecessary turnover. Again, the defense compromises itself to defend him. There's 3 defenders crowding him here, and if he could probe into the middle of them, he can find Gobert curling around for an easy bucket, or Naz Reid in the slot to attack a closeout, or Nickeil Alexander-Walker who will be in acres of space if Edwards can really bend the defense to his will. Instead, it's that all-out attack mentality that is his biggest strength, but can sometimes be his biggest weakness. Anthony Edwards is not Luka Doncic or Nikola Jokic, and he's never going to be those guys because he's so athletically gifted and such a force when he's in 6th gear, but he needs to develop some of that slow manipulation that those offensive engines possess. Luka already knows he's going to get Lively a dunk when Lively is still here at the top of the key because he has that pace-changing brilliance. As soon as he engages the rim protector, Lively can slide in behind him, and then Doncic can float it over Gobert, who has nobody big enough on the backside to now break up that lob. That's how you manipulate a defense to find easy dunks. Again, when Jokic comes off that same pick and roll that Edwards comes off dozens of times a game, he's seen that that low man is too small, he's seen that Towns is a step behind on the switch, and he's making that playmaking read without ever having to put his foot on the gas and win with athleticism. Again, Edwards isn't those guys. They are special playmakers, but he does bend defenses in the same way as those guys. The next step for him is breaking them in similar ways. And the common thread here is that they are finding open looks at the rim, which might be the most high percentage look in the league, even when you factor in that Edwards has to deal with Gobert's stone hands. So as he grows as a playmaker and as a ball-dominant force, can Edwards start finding this pass over the top to Gobert, who's just drifting into this open space? Because defenses are figuring out that he can't make this pass right now, and they tilt their entire defense toward him to force those turnovers. When he comes off this pin down and collapses that defense, can he draw the defense in and find that last second lob to Gobert? Because that's what makes defenders back off and second guess themselves the way that Gobert himself was all series long against Luka and the Mavericks. Teams simply can't defend him with this type of aggression that ends in situations like this if he can consistently throw that lob to punish them for doing so. So while Anthony Edwards is simply too much of a 100th percentile athlete to be that plodding playmaker who meanders around the court picking holes in a defense, this current Timberwolves roster construction will never reach its full potential offensively until he can take elements of that type of game and use them to not only get better looks for his rim running teammates, but also demand that the defense respect his interior passing, which will only help him score more at the rim himself. Edwards is well and truly on a fast track to superstar land, but this really feels like his final hurdle. He's been a huge improver in all areas every single season so far, but if he can learn to manipulate defenses and break them the way his peers do, he's going to be unstoppable. Thanks again for watching Howls and Growls. Thank you so much for all of the love this season, and make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any off-season content.